LaBerge and Samuel's automatic information processing model is the second bottom-up information processing model that we'll be talking about. The automatic information processing model integrated the concepts of internal attention, external attention, and automaticity into the information processing perspective of reading. The LaBerge and Samuel's model is a bottom-up model because it explains cognitive processing of information during reading from lower order to higher order level stages, while highlighting how attention and automaticity affect reading comprehension. It's a cognitive processing model because it focuses on explaining unobservable cognitive processes during reading. And it's an information processing theory because of its stage-by-stage processing, storage, and retrieval of information during reading. In the 80s, it was one of the most frequently presented models of reading methods in textbooks and is cited in many books when talking about reading fluency or repeated readings. The automatic information processing model has 5 major components. They are visual memory, phonological memory, episodic memory, semantic memory, and attention. Visual memory is where reading begins. It's where the graphic input from the text is processed. Visual memory is where letters are recognized and put into words. It is also where unitization occurs. During unitization, with a lot of practice, letters become recognized as words, and with more and more practice, these units accumulate, and the perception or identification of these words becomes increasingly automatic, and so this decreases the amount of attention that the brain has to spend recognizing words. After visual memory comes phonological memory, and this is where the sounds are attached to the letters to make words. Next, we have episodic and semantic memory, and that's where comprehension begins to occur. Episodic memory is where the context that is surrounding the information is increasing understanding, and semantic memory is the background knowledge and other kinds of knowledge that go together to help with comprehension. And last, we have attention, which is the central component to the automatic information processing model. Attention is important when reading text because it affects the reader's ability to comprehend and understand what they are reading. There are 2 types of attention highlighted in the information processing model. They are external attention and internal attention. External attention is the kind of attention that you can observe. You can see if your students are paying attention or looking at you. The little boy in the picture has put his head down on the book, so he's definitely not paying attention. He's not reading. Internal attention is not observable. It's what's going on inside your mind. And in the picture below, it looks like the gentleman in the front is paying attention, and then you can see the picture of his mind. He actually is doing his work. The lady in the middle looks like she's paying attention, but she's actually thinking about vacation. And the last person doesn't really look like they're paying attention. That's external attention, and obviously from the picture above, they're daydreaming, so that internal attention isn't there as well. There are 3 components to internal attention. They are alertness, selectivity, and limited capacity. Alertness is how active the reader is when they're trying to understand the message of the text or the story that they're reading. Selectivity allows the reader to decide which aspects of their experiences or parts of the text that they are going to pay attention to. And limited capacity means that we have a limited amount of memory and thought to go into what we're reading. And so if we're spending more time decoding the text and sounding out the words, the reader isn't spending as much time thinking about what's happening in the story and making that meaning and making those connections. According to automaticity theory, a fluent reader decodes text automatically, and that's without paying attention to the decoding process, to the letter sounds. That leaves their attention free to be used for comprehension. The repeated reading method was based on the theory of automaticity, and repeated readings provide the reading practice needed to become a fluent reader. The beginning reader versus the fluent reader. The beginning reader is the reader that's working on decoding and sounding out words. Most of their attention, their internal attention, is going towards this, and because of limited capacity, they have to go between decoding and sounding out the words and going back to comprehend and understand the story. This can be a slow process, and it can also be frustrating to beginning readers because they have to spend so much time sounding out the words to understand the story. In contrast, you have the fluent reader. They are reading automatically. Most of their attention has been freed up so that they are able to comprehend the text. The repeated reading method. The repeated reading method was based on LaBerge and Samuel's automaticity theory, which suggests fluent readers are those who decode text automatically, leaving attention free for comprehension. The repeated reading method was used in a 1979 study by Samuels to give students practice rereading text so that they could reach automaticity. This study found that there were improvements in starting fluency rates and fewer rereads needed to reach a student's fluency goal. The starting fluency rates means that the first time a student was reading a passage, they may read 20 words a minute. After practicing the repeated reading method, then the next time they might read 30 words a minute on their first read and then 40 words a minute. So they're constantly improving. Fewer rereads needed means that they may only have to read a story 2 or 3 times before they're reaching their goal. The original repeated reading method, which was established by Samuels for his study in 1979, began where students selected stories that were of interest to them and on their reading level. Depending on their skill, the student had a selection to read between 500 and 200 words, and they were able to practice reading that section. The student read the selection to an assistant first, who recorded their reading speed and number of correct words on a graph. The student then returned to his seat or her seat and practiced reading the selection while the next student read to the assistant. When the first student's turn came again, the procedure was repeated until they reached an 85 words per minute rate. Then they were able to choose another passage. Fluency or repeated reading activities can be used in classroom instruction as well as individualized student reading interventions. A couple more examples of those would be Fast Start, and this is where students practice fluency activities with their parents. They choose a text to reread with parents, and then they choose words that they find in that text that they either have interest in or they want more practice on, and they add those to a word bank. There's phrase reading, where you divide sentences into meaningful phrases, and the students practice reading those phrases instead of just reading word by word. It's also important to remind students that reading fluently is not just reading fast, that it includes being accurate, that it's automaticity, that they're able to read the words without sounding them out, that they're reading at a good rate, about the rate that they're speaking, and that their fluency includes prosody, so they're reading with expression. It's also important to remind students that fluent reading is done to increase their comprehension.